Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. EdChoice, which I think is the best school choice group in the country and is built on the legacy of Milton Friedman, recently conducted a survey of attitudes about government schools and school choice, and Paul DiPerna from EdChoice joins me now. So, what did your research find about the impact the coronavirus lockdowns have had on schooling this year?
Kyle, it's great to be with you, and thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. So our survey, which we conducted in two waves, once in the spring and then a follow up in this past fall in October. What we found is that during the pandemic, that there has been this shift to remote learning, and so about half of parents who were given the opportunity by their school district to choose, they would choose remote learning. We've seen an increase from the spring to the fall in terms of the children's stress level. The parents are reporting their kids are more stressed, they're less happy. They're grading their local schools less favorably compared to the spring. And so we saw a 19 percentage point drop in terms of those parents who had given A or B to their local schools, how the schools are responding to the pandemic. So there's been this, a downward trend along those different kinds of indicators. But yet there are some positive findings around school choice, particularly around education savings accounts and the promise and the positive potential that they bring, as well as other types of school choice types of policies like school vouchers, charter schools, and tax credit scholarships.
So let's talk about the decline in attitudes about public schools. Are they unhappy with basically the service that they're receiving? What is driving that decline?
So that's a great question, and it's a little bit speculative. We don't follow up immediately on the specific, asking for the specific reasons why. Mm-hmm. My impression though is that they just there is this general feeling and that among parents in particular, but also the general public more generally, that there's just more negative feelings around K-12 and the direction around K-12 education. They see the return to schools coming later in the school year, if at all. And so we ask about their comfort levels about their children returning to school, and that has changed, where parents say that they're less comfortable about their children returning to school this fall, and that could be. Again, we don't ask for the specific reasons why, which is a good thing to consider for future polling. But there are these other just a kind of range of factors that could be driving parent opinion and some of this kind of negative sentiment.
So most kids in America go to government-run public schools, but of course there's charter schools, there's online schooling, there's homeschooling, et cetera. What impact has the virus had on school choice options?
So what we've seen is that there has been, from the spring to the fall, a pretty steady feeling towards education savings accounts, and where we see more than 7 out of 10 parents saying that they support education savings accounts. About 2/3 are supportive of school vouchers, public charter schools, and we see, and that has been fairly steady. And so the movement has been just within some percentage, within plus or minus some percentage points there. But we do see that we ask a question about whether that parents feel they should have at least several options during this pandemic and on returning to school, and how they can educate their children this school year. And overwhelmingly, 71% in this most recent survey said 71% of parents said that they would want multiple options and for how they would school their children within the district or broadly using a range of school choice options.
Are you seeing states respond to provide those options?
That's a really good question. So there are some states that have taken action by leveraging the CARES Act funds and GEARS funds that were in the initial COVID relief uh, um, law earlier, that was passed earlier this year. So states like Idaho, Oklahoma, South Carolina have all taken different actions to try to broaden the kind of menu of choices that parents have for educating their children, whether it's at traditional school or through traditional schooling, or through like education services like tutoring, online coursework that they can supplement their regular schooling. And in the course of this time, we've seen this emergence of other types of schooling options and educational options like learning pods, where parents get together, small group of parents, small group of their children get together, and they essentially, are providing. They usually would hire a tutor or a teacher to provide instruction, or maybe the parents would take turns providing instruction. And my understanding is that some of these states have afforded some financial resources for those parents to give them to help bolster their education choices.
So there's a number of states, Michigan is a good example, New York, et cetera, where restaurants, other small businesses are saying, we can't, if this keeps going on, we can't survive this any longer, and we're going to have to close. How are private schools in particular, how are they faring?
So that's a really good question. So we and a couple other organizations too have surveyed and done some extensive interviewing of private school leaders across the country. We did a survey in April of how private schools were responding. It looked like they were doing all that they could to keep their doors open. And anecdotally, we've seen that in certain states where, like places like New York City, where most or all children in the public district schools have been remote learning or learning from home, where the Catholic schools and other private schools have been able to stay open. And so, but they've also been doing similar things as those district schools, where they're providing remote learning options and giving parents the option of whether to to do online learning or to come to school. But it does seem like, and the Cato Institute, Neil McCluskey at the Cato Institute, they did their own survey of private schools at the beginning of the school year, and it looked like the private schools were able to be potentially more nimble and flexible in terms of being able to keep their doors open where they could in the states around the country. And so it does seem like that they've been a little bit more flexible and amenable to parents' needs, to their parents' needs.
Talk a little bit about the racial disparities that you found in your research, not only when it comes to the lockdowns themselves, but what impact are the lockdowns and the remote learning and all of that? What academic impact will those have on Black and Hispanic children in particular?
So this is a huge question for students who are coming from communities of color and other types of and other populations where we do. NWEA is an assessment or one of the largest assessment companies in the country, and they've put out periodic reports showing learning loss for all students. And if I recall, the findings is about 3 to 4 months of learning loss for most students. But then when you look at low income or Black students, Hispanic students, where their learning loss could be much greater, much even twice that amount of learning. And so, and what we've seen is that in our polling, that Black parents and Latino parents are more reluctant to have their children go back in person. So it seems like there's a little bit, that implies, and this is speculative, that there's some lack of trust in what public officials and the school officials are saying and wanting to do, or even what they can offer what those parents of color, they actually can see, and they're more disproportionately more likely to say that they prefer remote learning or even perhaps homeschooling, and having more responsibility over their child's educations and that sort of thing.
So are those parents, are they staying in the public district and they're sort of riding it out when it comes to the remote learning, or are they looking at other options?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question where we see in our polling. And so we have conducted this, what I'd been talking about, this our Schooling in America survey, which we've been doing for 8 years now, and we conducted 2 waves. We also have a monthly tracking poll, and what we've seen in our monthly tracking poll, a separate survey, and when we look at the parents' responses, that they're, the public district parents and even Black parents and the Latino parents are say more likely to say switch from public district schools to homeschooling than other types of switches. And so it is interesting. And anecdotally, there's been news reports in the last couple of months where students are falling off, they're not being accounted for, especially in these big urban districts. And so it's really an unknown at this point. And we're trying to get at some of these, answers through our polling, and others are doing polling as well. There's been a lot of folks doing really good surveys the last 8 or 9 months. And I think this is a big question that we'll continue to look into throughout the school year.
Interesting. Paul DiPerna, Vice President of Research and Innovation for EdChoice. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Kyle. It's been great.
To find this study and others, visit edchoice.org. Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Parler, Kyle Olson 4. Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON, and the number 4. For this episode and others, visit thekyleolsonshow.com, thekyleolsonshow.com. This is The Kyle Olson Show.